Yeah, another very lovely evening out there to all of you, my dear friends. We left off in Isaiah 37, speaking of the annihilation from the death angel of the 185,000 Assyrian soldiers outside the gates of Jerusalem. He is very, very sick. A boil has come up on him, and he's incredibly, even to the point of death. And Hezekiah knows that his affairs must be set. And mind you, Hezekiah, he's only about 39 years old. We'll come to that. He's not an old man. Verse 1, in those days was Hezekiah sick unto death. And Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amoz, came unto him and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord, set thine house in order, for thou shalt die and not live. Talk about waking you up. A man of God that you know is in touch with the Lord, he comes in and tells you, set your affairs in order. You are about to cross over. It really makes everything in this life seem so small. You know, all the money, all the wealth, all the status, king, poor man. What does it matter at that point? You're about to go before eternity. Then Hezekiah turned his face toward the wall, wanting privacy. No doubt there's quite the crowd around him, being the king. He turns his face to the wall and prayed unto the Lord, and said, Remember now, O Lord, I beseech thee, how I have walked before thee in truth and with a perfect heart, and have done that which is good in thy sight. And Hezekiah wept sore. Hezekiah was in the full vigor of life, 39 years old only. He had probably as yet no son, since Manasseh, who succeeded him, was but 12 when Hezekiah died at the age of 54. But Hezekiah, he prays and he weeps, no doubt, even in front of all the people around. A king weeping right there. Because, how proud could one really become in that moment? It's the most humbling state that a person could ever be in. You're about to stand before God. Verse 4. Then came the word of the Lord to Isaiah, saying, Go and say to Hezekiah, Thus saith the Lord, the God of David thy father, I have heard thy prayer, I have seen thy tears. Behold, I will add unto thy days 15 years. Now this same event is recorded also in 2 Kings 20, and I'm not going to read the full thing, but it does add a little bit more to it than what's written in the book of Isaiah, where it says, Thus saith the Lord, the God of David thy father, I have heard thy prayer, I have seen thy tears. Behold, I will heal thee on the third day. Thou shalt go up into the house of the Lord. So 15 years is granted unto this king, a very precise number. 15 years. This was doubling, or rather more than doubling, the length of Hezekiah's reign, and allowing him a length of life exceeding that of the great majority of the kings of Judah, who seldom attained the age of 50. Hezekiah lived to be 54. This is perhaps the only instance in which any man has been told exactly how long he would live outside of Christ. Every earthly man. This is perhaps the only instance. Why God specified the time cannot now be known. It was, however, a full answer to the prayer of Hezekiah, and the promise is a full demonstration that God is the hearer of prayer and that he can answer it at once, even immediately, if he so chooses. But wouldn't that would be a very eerie spot to be in. To me, there's a bliss in ignorance, not knowing when we're going to cross over. There is a great bliss in that. Imagine if you knew the very day that you were going to die. Just imagine if you knew the year that you was going to die. You would be on pins and needles that entire year. Up until then, you have a supernatural comfort, let's say. You know, you can enjoy life to a fuller extent than most. But on that 15th year, pins and needles. So coming back to verse 7 of Isaiah 38, we see how the Lord, he's given him these promises to, first of all, the 15 years, as well as defend the city against the Assyrians, which we went over in the previous Bible study. But then he says, and here's the sign that I will give unto you, that the Lord will do this thing that he hath spoken. Behold, I will bring again the shadow of the degrees on a sundial, which is gone down in the sundial of Ahaz, 10 degrees backward. So the sun returned 10 degrees, by which degrees it was gone down. And once again, we're given just a little bit more detail in 2 Kings 20. And Hezekiah said unto Isaiah, What shall be the sign that the Lord will heal me, and that I shall go up into the house of the Lord the third day? And Isaiah said, This sign shall the Lord give unto you. And then he asked him, he says, right here's the sign that the Lord will give. He'll do this thing. Shall the shadow on the sundial, shall it go forward 10 degrees or go back 10 degrees? And Hezekiah answered, It is a light thing for the shadow to go down 10 degrees. Nay, but let the shadow return backward 10 degrees. And Isaiah the prophet cried unto the Lord, and he brought the shadow 10 degrees backward, by which it had gone down in the dial of Ahaz. What is a sundial? What's the whole point of this thing? It was like an old time, the ancient clocks back then. The oldest known instrument for telling time, the sundial, allows us to track the position of the sun more accurately. Up until the early 19th century, sundials were the main instrument people used to tell time. If they are correctly placed, sundials can be used to accurately tell the time down to the minute. And right here's an oversimplified manner of looking at the sundial. It's just kind of like a clock that we see today. Wherever the shadow would be would indicate what time of day that it was. We are informed by Herodotus, the ancient historian, that the sundial was an invention of the Babylonians. Very important. The Babylonians probably came up with such a thing, from whom it would readily pass to the Assyrians. Ahaz, Hezekiah's father, may have obtained a knowledge of it or an actual specimen when he visited Tiglath-Pileser at Damascus in 2 Kings 16, and on his return to his capital in Jerusalem have caused one to be erected there. Now the sun, compared to the earth, third from the sun compared to the earth is just absolutely enormous. And we know that this earth is huge. It's really hard to wrap your mind around these types of illustrations. But in order to make this sundial move, we don't exactly know how it happened. But I think that there may be an explanation. How the effect was produced, whether by an eclipse, as argued by Mr. Bosanquet, or by refraction, or by an actual alteration of the Earth's motion, we are not told. Now that would disrupt everything, basically. But we do know that God, He displays full control over the cosmos. We can look back at the time when Joshua, he prayed for the sun to cease up in the sky so that they could finish the battle. And the Lord did that. So the Lord, he has methods of going about this. But what is refraction exactly?
Let's forget about light for a second and picture a car traveling along a road surface, then reaching a patch of sand. Just like the light wave, the car slows down as it reaches a different material. But now, imagine the car reaches the sand at an angle. As the first wheel reaches the sand, it slows down. But for a short period of time, the other wheels continue at a faster speed. Because the wheel on one side is going slower, the whole car turns slightly. Once the whole car is on the sand, it continues in a straight line, but not the same straight line that it was traveling on along the road. Light rays work in the same way. If light rays are moving through air and reach a different material at an angle, they'll change direction slightly. This is a ray box that we often use for light experiments. And this cover lets us beam a narrow ray of light from the bulb. If I aim the beam at the plastic block at an angle and turn the other lights in the room off, you can see the light beam is bent as it enters the plastic, and again as it exits. This happens just like the car reaching the sand. The speed of the light ray decreases as it reaches the plastic block, but then speeds up again as it exits the block. This bending of light is known as refraction. We can say that the light is refracted.
So I believe that may be the most plausible explanation. All that the Lord would have had to have done was placed something in which would have redirected very slightly the light of the sun. I mean, that sounds like a huge thing for some somebody to do, but the Lord is not like anyone. He can do this, and it's a light thing to God. Anyway, we read in 2 Chronicles 32 about how this cosmic miracle, how it was noticed even by Babylon themselves, in which we'll read right here in just a minute in the next chapter. Howbeit in the business of the ambassadors of the princes of Babylon, who sent unto Hezekiah to inquire of the wonder that was done in the land, God left him to try him, that he might know all that was in his heart, meaning Hezekiah, to try Hezekiah. But the Babylonians, they took notice of this cosmic miracle. Isaiah 38, verse 9, the writing of Hezekiah, king of Judah, when he had been sick and was recovered of his sickness, I said in the cutting off of my days, I shall go to the gates of the grave, and I am deprived of the residue of my years. I said, I shall not see the Lord, even the Lord, in the land of the living. I shall behold man no more with the inhabitants of the world, very distressed. Mine age is departed, and is removed from me as a shepherd's tent. I have cut off like a weaver my life. He will cut me off with pining sickness. From day even to night wilt thou make an end of me. I reckon till morning that as a lion, so will he break all my bones. From day even to night wilt thou make an end of me. Like a crane or a swallow, so did I chatter. I did mourn as a dove. Mine eyes fell with looking upward. O Lord, I am oppressed. Undertake for me. What shall I say? He hath both spoken unto me, and himself hath done it. I shall go softly all my years in the bitterness of my soul. O Lord, by these things men live, and in all these things is the life of my spirit. So wilt thou recover me, and make me to live. Behold, for peace I had great bitterness, but thou hast in love to my soul delivered it from the pit of corruption. For thou hast cast all my sins behind thy back. For the grave cannot praise thee, death cannot celebrate thee. They that go down into the pit cannot hope for thy truth. The living, he shall praise thee, as I do this day. The father to the children shall make known thy truth. The Lord was ready to save me, therefore we will sing my songs to the stringed instruments all the days of our life in the house of the Lord. Now for the closing verses of 38. For Isaiah had said, let them take a lump of figs and lay it for a plaster upon the boil, and he shall recover. Hezekiah also had said, what is the sign that I shall go up into the house of the Lord? This is all just mentioning what we already went over. Chapter 39. At that time Merodach-Baladan, the son of Baladan, king of Babylon, sent letters and a present to Hezekiah, for he had heard that he had been sick and was recovered. The mission of these ambassadors had two ostensible objectives. Congratulation on Hezekiah's recovery, number one, and number two, to inquire and report as to the phenomenon of the sundial. Really, we may believe the object of Merodach-Baladan was to open negotiations for an alliance with Judah against Assyria. And now we see Hezekiah in the very next verse. He hasn't been healed very long, and we see him mess up big time. And Hezekiah was glad of them, seeing them, and showed them the house of his precious things, the silver and the gold and the spices and the precious ointment, and all the house of his armor, and all that was found in his treasures. There was nothing in his house, nor in all his dominion, that Hezekiah did not show them. God may do a tremendous miracle for you, but that doesn't mean live in relaxation and just take it easy. David did this, and then he went out on his roof one day, and he saw a naked woman that belonged to another man, and it just got bad. It was not the mere act, but the spirit of it which provoked God. God tries his people at different times by different ways, bringing out all that is in their heart to show them its varied corruptions. 2 Chronicles 32, 24 and 25. In those days Hezekiah was sick to the death, and prayed unto the Lord, and he spake unto him, and gave him a sign, the sundial. But Hezekiah rendered not again according to the benefit done unto him, for his heart was lifted up. Therefore there was wrath upon him, and upon Judah and Jerusalem. The people would even suffer because of his being lifted up. And a proud man always goes about boasting of anything. And he's boasting of his treasures to Babylonians. Verse 3, Then came Isaiah the prophet unto King Hezekiah, and said unto him, What said these men? And from whence came they unto thee? And Hezekiah said, They are come from a far country unto me, even from Babylon. Now this should be a very familiar situation if you're biblically caught up on everything. David, whenever he messed up and angered God with Bathsheba and the death of Uriah and the plotting and scheming and all this, whenever David messed up, Nathan, the prophet, came in and rebuked him to his face, if you'll remember. Well, the very same thing it's very similar happening right here to Hezekiah from Isaiah. He's rebuking him now. Then said Isaiah, What have they seen in thine house? And Hezekiah answered, All that is in mine house have they seen. There is nothing among my treasures that I have not showed them. Now we know that the Lord had already let Isaiah in on what Hezekiah did. It's just there's something about getting a man to confess. God even does this to people. Where art thou, Adam? Well, what have you done? And all of this, it's just getting the person to confess. There's something about confession. That way this is a weird way to say it, but it's kind of out in front of your face, the words of it. And whenever the sentence is pronounced, it's right before you. But what Hezekiah did was he put his people in danger by showing these very cruel people all of these riches. I mean, showed them Solomon's temple, his armory, his weapons. He showed them everything. And that goes to show us how there's many things that you shouldn't let people in on. You should keep them to yourself, between you, God, your wife, whoever. You shouldn't let the world in on much. They'll take advantage. Such a sight of treasures would certainly have left the Babylonian ambassadors with a similar disposition as that of Attila the Hun towards the settlements of Rome, saying within themselves, What a city to plunder. Verse 5. Then said Isaiah to Hezekiah, Hear the word of the Lord of hosts. Behold, the days come that all that is in thine house and that which thy fathers have laid up in store until this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, saith the Lord. And of thy sons that shall issue from thee, which thou shalt beget, tells us that he hadn't had a son yet, which thou shalt beget, shall they take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. In other words, your entire house is going to be left desolate, which is crushing for a man to wonder about, because especially back then, being upon the throne, you wanted to leave a lasting legacy because your name would be remembered. You would always be thought of among men. You had made your mark in the world. Your memory carries on through your sons and their sons. But if you're cut off, your memory's forgotten. It's almost as if you never existed, and all your hard labor just goes to naught, which in the very end of everything, it pretty much goes to naught anyway, unless it's for Christ. Okay, the only what we do for Christ will last, my friends. Verse 8, After Hezekiah is told that he'll have nothing of these things remaining in just a short while, then said Hezekiah to Isaiah, Good is the word of the Lord which thou hast spoken. He said, moreover, For there shall be peace and truth in my days. That's a very awkward reply, isn't it? That always kind of hits me from left field. And some of the commentators believe that he took a very selfish stance with this. I went with what Barnes commented on with it because I didn't want to go too harsh against Hezekiah. He may have not have meant it in such a selfish manner. He had abundant cause of gratitude. Therefore, that God was dealing with him in so much kindness. It cannot be shown that Hezekiah was regardless of his posterity or unconcerned at the calamity which would come upon them. All that the passage fairly implies is that he saw that it was right, and that it was proof of great mercy in God that the punishment was deferred, even during his time, and was not, as in the case of David, to be inflicted in his own time. Basically, God's judgment is right. But I'm still glad that I'm going to have peace in my days, he says. So there it is, my friends. Hezekiah, he's told, I'm going to give you 15 more years onto your life. Some of the best news that a man could ever receive, if especially just for the earthly means of existence. 15 more years onto your life, and then he goes and messes up immediately. He gets too proud. Always be in a humble state. God loves the broken and contrite hearts. That doesn't mean walk around sad all the time, but walk around humble. Don't think of yourself as anything. We're nothing anyway. It's all Christ. That's the glory of us, Christians. Outside of Him, what are we? Dead and doomed. But I thank you all for listening once again, my dear friends. A very sad ending, I know, to this week's studies, but I thank you all for listening. Lord willing, we're going to be picking up in Isaiah 40 and beyond. Lord willing. God of peace be with you. Amen.